We both know that governance is often talked about, but rarely understood.
The entire system of governance collapsed. And why is that? Because the rules were there, but the culture was absent. It is a culture and it is an intent. Smart governance protects the organizations while enabling growth. If you pull the rope very hard, it will snap. The questions that everyone avoids might be the one to prevent a crisis that hasn't occurred yet.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Voices of Governance, a podcast series by Hawkamah, the Institute of Governance, where we sit down with and explore the minds shaping the future of corporate governance across the region. In this episode, we're honoured to be joined by a trailblazer in the governance landscape in the region, Dr. Maryam Alsuwaidi, with a distinguished career at the Securities and Commodities Authority, ESCA, culminating in her role as CEO of ESCA. Her passion for institutional regulation and corporate governance has left a lasting impact on the UAE's regulatory framework. She serves as a member of Hawkamah's own board of directors, and she's also served on the boards of Al Etihad Credit Bureau and as a trustee of the National CSR Fund Majra, further demonstrating her commitment to responsible leadership and sustainable development. So let's dive in. So Dr. Maryam, firstly, welcome to this episode of the Voices of Governance podcast. We both know that governance is often talked about, but rarely understood. At Hawkamah, we've seen organisations across the region, different practices from company to company. And I imagine during your time at ESCA, you've had front row seats at both good practices, but also some of the not so good practices. So my first question to you today is, what is corporate governance to you, and how did you first become involved with corporate governance?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It is wonderful to be part of this conversation. You're absolutely right. Governance or corporate governance is everywhere in strategic discussions. But its actual practice, that's a whole different story. Mm-hmm. During my time at the SCA, I had a front, seat view of how companies, embrace governance, either at board or committee levels, or in involving with, shareholders, or when formulating internal policies. Some saw it as a box-ticking exercise, something, to mention in the annual report and forget about it. Others, especially those with strategic, investors, saw it as a value add. For them, governance was more of performance, about trust and accountability, as well as transparency. I've seen boards where a corporate governance was just a word on paper, whereas, conflicts of interest were swept under the rug. However, I've seen companies that they were like world class in applying corporate governance. So I've seen both, yeah? So as I said, I've seen companies who apply corporate governance for themselves and set high standards. And of course, that without even the authority asking them to do so. So to me, governance is kind of the brain of the company, or maybe even it's conscious. It is what guides decision, balances interest, and link performance with responsibility. So it is a culture, and it is an intent. It is a way of doing business as well as a way of thinking. So my own journey started in finance, where I was watching listed companies and markets evolve. But it was at ESCA where I really saw the power of governance, where it could save a company from, collapsing. So corporate governance, as I said, it is an intent. Mm-hmm. It's about leadership.
Amazing. I think that's some really useful insight there. And you mentioned your time with ESCA. I mean, I note that you spent over 20 years at the organisation, and including a few years as the CEO. So during your time, you would have seen lots of different things. Can you give a view on how corporate governance has matured in the region over your time with the organisation?
Well, it's been quite a transformation, I must say. When I first joined, corporate governance was not really part of the conversation. Companies were more focused on growth, profits, and making or keeping the promoters happy. Governance to them at that stage was optional, nice to have, but not as essential. But things started to change. And I believe I would say three big forces drove that change. First, regulation. After the 2000 financial crisis, we realized that we needed more or stronger regulation. So we rolled up our sleeves and started creating clear and practical guidelines. Secondly, investor, especially institutional ones, both local and international. They demanded transparency and accountability. And if you wanted their money, you had to play by their rules. Third, leadership maturity. So boards began to understand the importance of corporate governance and how it is like a strategic tool. So, and it's not about, it's not just a compliance system. It's about building resilient and high-performing organizations. Have we reached full maturity? Not quite. There are still gaps. Some companies are world-class in applying governance practices. Others do the bare minimum. Yeah. Also, companies still see it as a burden. So the real challenge now is cultural and how to embed governance into the DNA of organizations. But I'm optimistic because we have a new generation of leaderships that understand what governance as a strategic advantage. I believe that this would help, and this is a sign that the best is yet to come.
Amazing. And I think all of our listeners will be really interested to hear more about your time at ESCA. I think we haven't had the kind of true understanding of what happens at the regulator. Can you give me some of the key changes that you brought on during your time there at the organisation?
This is really a topic that is close to my heart because over the years, we didn't just tweak the regulation. We reimagined how governance could work in practice. One of the first big steps was to issue a comprehensive governance guide for listed companies. It lays out everything. Before that, there was a gap. So there was like no direction on board responsibilities, committee structure, or even disclosure standards. So we built a framework that was firm and flexible at the same time, grounded in international best practices. But we didn't stop there. We kept updating the regulation. Just to make the regulation stay, relevant and adapting to the global, trends and the standards, especially from those like the OECD or IOSCO. So governance isn't static. It has to evolve with the market. We also pushed disclosure very hard. Now companies disclose their governance reports as well as material, informations, because this is important for investor. And we have also digitized those information so investor can access it easily. So this is like a huge shift from where we started. Another big move was self-regulation. We wanted companies to embrace governance from within and not because the authority said so. So we launched training programs, awareness campaigns, and even help, like voluntary initiatives to help companies to create their own culture.
Okay.
And we didn't forget investors because they are very important and their voices matters, and we want them to know that their voices are heard. So we encourage investors to participate in governance assessments. As I said, their voices matter. Very importantly, we push diversity on boards through regulation. So now companies are required to appoint a woman on the boards. It is, of course, breakthrough. So this requirement, we're going to speak about, of course, diversity, but this was like, as I said, big achievement. Also, we started adapting to ESG principles, which is environment, social, and governance standard. We integrate them into our frameworks. Companies now disclose sustainability reports alongside financial reports. And of course, this is a game changer. But here is the real impact. These changes, was just not words on paper. What happened is that now companies started to adopt, governance voluntarily. They started even improving their credit rating, attracting better finance. So we're really proud of this. So yes, regulation matters, but what we are most proud of, the shift from the, mandatory system or mandatory compliance to institutional empowerment. And of course, as I said, that's the, transformation that we are most, that we work so hard to achieve.
Amazing. I think it's really great to hear and kind of list the different changes from disclosure practices to sustainability. And a lot of these practices we probably take for granted now as business as usual activities, but it would have taken strong leadership to push this through from the very beginning. So thank you very much for sharing that. I was quite interested to hear, you also kind of talked that, we are still maturing in the region.
Yes.
Practices are still changing. You've outlined some of them, but what do you think are some of the challenges that still face us in the region with respect to enhancing governance practices?
Well, that's a great question, and it's very important because while we have, worked so hard and we've come a long way, there are still some deep-rooted, challenges that we need to tackle head-on. So first off, traditional corporate culture. In many of the family-owned businesses, decisions are still made on, personal relationships rather than institutional, practices. So that can undermine the independence and accountability. Then there is the issue of board independence. Sometimes boards are filled with friends or close associates of the owner. That might give comfort, but it undermines the oversight on the company. We need to shift towards selecting boards based on their expertise and not just for the reason of familiarity. Disclosure and transparency is another area. So despite having clear regulation, there are still some gap, and the level of openness varies widely between the companies. Some companies are world-class and they are, in applying corporate governance. Others do the minimum, while a few, delay sharing material information altogether. So that's another challenge. And let's not forget about SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. Many of them they don't have governance specialists or internal structure. So, SMEs, even when they're willing to apply corporate governance, they lack the tool to do so. Lastly, there is the misconception that governance slow things down, especially in fast-moving sectors like tech and startups. But that's not true. When done right, governance enables growth, and of course, give clarity and reduces risk. So yes, the challenges are real, but there is the silver lining: awareness is growing. Once board and executives understand, governance, that it's not as a burden, but as a strategic tool, the shift will be unstoppable.
Amazing. I completely agree with you. I think we are on a really positive journey, and the key to improvement is to understand some of your limitations and kind of areas to improve on. So I think you've highlighted that really well. So thank you for that. And kind of moving on to the next section of the podcast, given your background leading ESCA, and given the number of questions that we get in Hawkamah in our advisory services and our training workshops, I'm sure our listeners would really enjoy a deep dive into the role of regulations in governance. I think we can all agree that the regulators play a central role in defining the boundaries for good governance. And it's not just about enforcing the rules, it's also about trust and enabling confidence in the markets. So from your perspective, what role do you think the regulator should ideally play when it comes to strengthening governance frameworks?
Well, regulators often seen as the rule enforcers, the ones who say yes or no. But it is much deeper than that, and more. The role of the regulators are much deeper and more dynamic. First and foremost, regulators such as central banks, ministries of economy, or even financial market regulators set the stage. So, like in the UAE, the SCA, which is the Securities and Commodities Authority, issued, as I said, the comprehensive guide, which is, it has all the details about board structure and board responsibilities, and it lays out everything. So from, as I said, board responsibilities to the governance, to the disclosure standards. So that's one big role. But it doesn't stop there. Regulators also monitor and supervise. They inspect companies, review reports, and impose penalties when necessary. So this oversight builds trust, not within companies only, but also across the market. Then there is the educational role. Regulators run workshops, publish best practice guidelines, and also support SMEs in adopting governance standards. The goal here is to shift governance from being a legal responsibility to becoming something natural of how companies operate. Transparency is another big area. Regulators push companies to disclose strategic decisions, risk, and conflict of interest. This helps shareholder to have, clear, or to have the bigger picture about the company, and they avoid the chance of misuse or manipulation. And finally, regulators help to create a fair playing field. Okay, they protect investors, especially minority, and they prevent monopolies and ensure that competition is healthy and ethical. So yes, regulators are lawmakers, but they are also educators, guides, and protectors or guardians of market integrity.
I think it's really interesting to hear about the role of the regulator, and particularly around, like you said, oversight, education for companies, and making governance a bit more natural. But I'm sure you've also seen cases where governance has failed, despite the rules being in place. So do you think that regulation alone can ensure strong governance?
In all fairness, regulation alone cannot guarantee good governance. even if it was at the highest level of rigor and precision. Yes, I have witnessed cases, both during my time at the SCA and through professional follow-up, in which rules were issued. It was there in place, and disclosures were published, and even committee were operational and structured, but that was on paper. When the first real test happened, such as financial crisis or maybe internal conflict or conflict of interest, the entire system of governance collapsed. And why is that? Because the rules were there, but the culture was absent. It was a formal commitment, but not an intention or a conviction from the leader. Regulators, sets the minimum standards, but which is, very important. But it will be worthless if there are no leaders who believe in the role of the corporate governance, and active investors, truly independent boards, and also an internal environment that encourages reporting risk and violations. So in the failures, I've seen that the flow is always in the behavior and not the script. Therefore, I believe that, good and strong governance should be built on 3 pillars: strong organizations, mature internal culture, as well as smart community oversight. It's either from investors, from the customers, from employees, and even from the media itself. So true governance starts within the company, and regulation only shows the way.
Wow, I think that's a really useful insight. And you've talked about some of the kind of the best practices. We've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about sometimes when governance has failed. You've even talked about kind of the different types of company structures. So you mentioned family businesses earlier. I think it'd be really interesting to get your views on how you think governance is different for listed companies compared to private firms.
Well, governance looks very different depending on whether the company is listed on stock exchange or privately held. It's like comparing a public performance with behind the scene, rehearsal. Both important, but with very different rules. So let's start with listed companies, because they are under the microscope. They're required to disclose financial and non-financial data regularly. Annual governance report, as well as material informations, all this should be disclosed. So transparency isn't optional. It is the law. They also have to meet specific standards around board composition. That means independent directors, specialized committees like the audit and remuneration, and a clear separation between the CEO and the board chair. It is all designed to, of course, protect shareholders, especially smaller ones, and ensure that decisions are made fairly. Now, private companies, especially family-run ones, operate quite differently. Often, the manager is also the owner. And the board, if there is one, include close associates of the owner. There is no legal requirement to disclose, and also there's no requirement to form committees or, as I said, or disclosure requirement. Decisions are centralized, and governance tends to be informal. And then there is the issue of culture. Listed companies are built in the principle of separation between ownership and management. While, of course, that creates professionalism and reduce the risk of conflicts of interest. But in private firms, they're more built on personal relationships. And you can see there's an overlapping roles, resistance to change, as well as, succession challenges. So yes, governance in listed companies is structural and institutional, while in private firms they are, as I said, more personal. And its success depends on the mindset of the owners. But here's the good news. As private companies grow, many of them, they started to adopt governance practices. And of course, that's a huge, shift and a sign of maturity.
Yes, no, thank you very much for those interesting insights, particularly with respect to the kind of the different challenges in different company structures, particularly at that board level, which is kind of one of Hawkamah's main focuses. And one of the most fascinating and underexplored aspects of a leadership journey is the transition from being an executive, actively managing the business, the day-to-day operations, to taking on that non-executive role, where the focus shifts to oversight, strategic planning and guidance and governance. At Hawkamah, we particularly see this in big group structures where the parent or holding company places nominee directors on its boards of its subsidiaries, meaning that people need to wear, as we like to say, multiple hats and the challenges that these present. But Dr. Maryam, it's clear to see that you've navigated this transition at the highest levels. In your opinion, how different is it to serve as a non-executive director or as an advisor in that capacity compared with in an executive role?
Well, it is fast-paced, hands-on, and very outcome-driven. But when you move into a non-executive role, things changes. You are no longer managing the day-to-day, but you are guiding the big picture. You ask questions instead of giving instructions. And you focus on risk, strategy, sustainability, and shareholder relationships. So it's about oversight, not execution. And that's require a different mindset. You have to step back, trust the team, and resist the urge to dive into operational details. Of course, then there is the board advisory role, which is even more flexible. You are not formally responsible as a board member, but you are, you bring your expertise, analysis, and thoughts to the table. You help shape policy, build capacity, and offer perspective without having to make the final call. What I've learned is that this transition kind of professional maturity. So you realize that influence doesn't always come from direct control. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the most powerful impact comes from asking the right questions, offering new lens, and helping others to see the bigger picture. So, and when you get it, it's incredibly rewarding.
And it's clear to see that you've made that transition from the executive to the non-executive role really well. And your experience kind of speaks volumes. You are the first woman to head ESCA. Previously, you were Forbes' 11th most powerful businesswoman in the Middle East, and now you sit on multiple boards, including that of Hawkamah. And we've seen growing conversations around gender and broader diversity in boardrooms in recent times. How do you believe the UAE is progressing on this front, and what is your experience of diversity in the boardroom?
Well, diversity is often talked about in terms of gender. And yes, of course, having women on boards is very important. But real diversity, it goes, much deeper. It's about diversity of thoughts, experience, backgrounds, and even generation. In the UAE, I'm proud of the progress that we have made so far. Regulatory bodies now require listed companies as well as private joint stock companies to include women on their boards. I mean, we have also the belief here in the country, especially from our leadership, that diversity leads to better decisions and stronger governance. From my own experience, I can tell you that when women are fully empowered on boards, they bring, a unique perspective. It is not just about, representation. It's about adding value. So women often bring a holistic view. They have stronger communication. They bring a different perspective or approach to risk and a deeper sense of social responsibility. But we still face some, challenges. Still, sometimes women are appointed to boards just to meet a quota, without being real, without being given real influence. That's what we call tokenism, and it doesn't serve, anyone. The goal should be to build boards that are genuinely diverse in age, in sectoral experience, in backgrounds, and academic, backgrounds, and in strategic vision. Diversity isn't a cosmetic goal, but it is a performance lever. When boards truly understand that, they become more dynamic, resilient, and more innovative. So personally, I've been fortunate to work with boards that understood this. But, truly, I look to the day that when having or appointing a woman on boards, it's not a news. It is something natural, expected, required.
Amazing. And I think I would just add that, at Hawkamah, we are true advocates for diversity in the boardrooms in whatever form that diversity takes. And as you know, one of our main focuses is to equip, potential directors with the skills needed to secure board opportunities, particularly through our director development program. As someone who's worked with many boards, both as an executive and as a director yourself, from your perspective, what qualities differentiate a good director from a great one?
Well, what sets a good director apart from great ones is the depth of insight and the ability to influence without dominating. Good directors, they understand governance and fulfill their duties. While great directors, they go further. They ask the right questions, challenge constructively, and think strategically. They listen more than they speak and bring diverse perspectives and help, long-term value. Great directors also know when to step back, allowing management to lead while offering guidance with clarity, of course, and independence. It's not just about, oversight. It's about wisdom, balance, and purpose to the boardroom.
So now looking forward to the future, as we know, corporate governance isn't static. It's continuously evolving in response to emerging risks, shifting stakeholder expectations, and potential disruptors like technology, sustainability, and also geopolitical issues. You've played a pivotal role in shaping the governance landscape in the UAE and the wider region. So I think your perspective on this it's super important, and I'd love to figure out and find out from you. So what trends do you see shaping the future here in the UAE and more widely globally?
Well, I believe there are 5 major trends that will reshape the corporate governance landscape in the UAE and globally over the next decade. First, the rising importance of sustainability and ESG responsibility. Sustainability is no longer like a voluntary commitment. It becomes part of the disclosure mandatory requirements, with a stronger link between ESG and the corporate performance indicators and executive incentives. So in the UAE, for example, net zero initiatives, there are driving companies to redesign supply chain and investment plans. Second, digital transformation and technology governance. With the spread of artificial intelligence and big data, analytics, boards will be expected to understand digital risk and data security as deeply as they understand financial risks. AI governance, this is also another topic, will move from being an innovative topic to a regulatory requirement. Third, it's about the expanded role of stakeholders and shareholders. Investors, particularly sovereign wealth funds and institutional, global institutions, will demand more transparency and more involvement in, shaping the long-term strategy rather than just receiving periodic reports. Fourth is the focus on diversity and inclusion in the boardroom. Experience shown that diversity, especially on background and expertise, enhance decision, making quality. And we will see stricter, policies to ensure broader representation of women, youth, and varied professional backgrounds. Also, there is the adapting to shifting geopolitical and economic risks. From supply chain disruptions to energy price volatility, boards will need to become more, agile and quicker in shaping the company or strategic plan. Ultimately, the future of governance will not be about simply complying with rules. It will be a dynamic practice that requires board to be more aware, innovative, and proactive in addressing emerging challenges. So also boards are being asked to lead with independence and integrity and transparency and long-term, vision. It's no longer about oversight. It's about shaping the future responsibly.
Wow, I think it's clear to see that we are in a truly kind of innovative field of work, and you've outlined 5 trends that you think that the future of governance holds. So what advice could you give to board members and executives now who are trying to improve governance in their organizations?
Well, my advice starts with simple but fundamental principle. Corporate governance is not documents or policies on the shelf. It is a culture and a daily practice. So first, make governance a strategic priority, not just a compliance requirement. For example, in one of the company that I have worked with, governance goals were linked to the company's growth plan. So turning, transparency and accountability into magnets for investors and business partners. Second, invest in training for both the board as well as the executive team. With when both sides share a clear understanding of their respective roles, it will reduce overlaps in authority and allows board to focus on the bigger picture and long-term vision rather than day-to-day operational details. Also, connect governance with tangible results. For instance, when the risk management processes and financial disclosures are improving, share those success stories internally and externally. And that is to demonstrate how strong governance can, lead to better decisions and higher profitability. And finally, maintain open dialogue with shareholders. Governance is not just an internal relationship between the boards and the management. It is an active relationship that includes investors, employees, customers, and the entire community. So further, ensure boards are truly independent. This is for the executives, and diverse. So with more focus on expertise, not just their connections.
Finally, thank you so much, Doctor, for your time today. I think it's been really interesting to dig into your background, get your advice for current kind of executives and board members, and then get your insights for the future. But I think one final question, and I think this is one for our listeners, and particularly those who have aspirations of being future leaders in the region. If you could go back and give your younger self some advice when starting your journey in governance, what would that be?
I still remember the first time I sat on boardroom table. In front of me were stacks of files, policies, regulations, and complex data. Back then, I believed governance was about mastering all these, documents, and to strictly adhere to, every single clause. And I thought success was measured by perfect compliance with the rules. But if I could go back now, to that moment today, and I would lean in and whisper to myself that understand the essence, not the form. True governance is not in the files, but it is in the minds and hearts of those who live it. So over the years, I've come to realize 3 fundamental truths. First, build bridges before you build rules. Active listening often, reveals what data alone cannot. Sometimes a casual remark from a junior employee, could point out to a major strategic, risk, more than what, or better than formal report can, do. So trust is very important, and it is built through relationships and not just through regulations. Secondly, balance compliance with innovation. Smart governance protects the organizations while enabling growth. So if you, pull the rope very hard, it will snap. And if you leave it loose, it will tangle. So striking a balance requires sensitivity and a deep understanding of context. And lastly, develop soft skills. Skills like empathy, active listening, clear communication, they help to inspire and guide the team effectively. And emotional intelligence supports staying calm and objective, even when, challenges arise. So, in short, soft skills turn authority to influence. And that's what great leaders is all about. And finally, I would remind myself that never hesitate to ask the difficult questions, even if they feel uncomfortable. The questions that everyone avoids might be the one to preventing a crisis that hasn't occurred yet.
Wonderful. All that's left to remain to say is thank you very much for your time today. And I'm sure many of the listeners will take this advice on board and help their careers in corporate governance. So thank you very much for your time, Doctor.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
That wraps up this episode of Voices of Governance. A heartfelt thank you to Dr. Maryam for sharing her insights, experiences, and vision for the future of corporate governance in the region. Her journey reminds us that governance isn't just about rules and frameworks. It's about leadership, clarity, and the ability to connect with purpose. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to follow the podcast, post your questions or thoughts with us in the comments below, and share this episode with colleagues and peers who are just as passionate as us about corporate governance. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon with more voices, more stories, and more insights from the voices shaping governance across the region and beyond. Until then, take care.